I'm not really in the business of dealing with credit cards and how they work, and I'm not in the business of dealing with professional industrial cleaning. But I will say this. The fact that I just listened with riveted attention to the stories that Paul told in relation to industries that I have nothing to do with, the fact that he held my attention and I was actually interested in listening to his stories, and I was actually engaged by his stories, is proof positive. If you guys are like me at all, I am sure you feel the same way, is proof positive that we need to learn how to use stories to sell with. Hey everybody, I'm Ken Newhouse, and I'm going to welcome you to the Get Clients Now podcast, the show where high-growth consultants and professionals come to access the newest and most effective methods and systems for online marketing, advanced sales and persuasive communication strategies, and automated marketing funnels. And if you're wondering if the Get Clients Now podcast can help you get more high-value clients, enjoy more sales, build a massive tribe, and make more money, you're absolutely going to love this show.
Newhouse's work completely blows everything else that we've ever done with Google out of the water.
I have been looking for a way to grow my presence online, and what I've viewed from Newhouse's work was something that certainly is faster than anything I've seen before.
He says he's going to do something and he does it. He does it in the time frame that he says he's going to do it in. It's exciting when you talk about the results that you're going to get, and you can believe his word because he follows it up with action.
The Newhouse is direct, he's to the point, he tells you what's on his mind, and he backs his words up. From what I know now, from working with him, he's passionate about his work, and he backs it up 100%.
What I like best is you offer something that no one else has out there, which is a pretty comprehensive approach about marketing a system.
If somebody asks me, should they use a Newhouse's team? Absolutely, because you're going to get the important information that you need very, very quickly.
On the internet, on the different marketing techniques, I've never experienced anything like this.
I would definitely recommend Ken Newhouse for someone who's serious about growing their business. I think that your results based on the numbers would at least double the sales in a very short time frame.
Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here from funneltribes.com, and I'm going to welcome you back to the Get Clients Now podcast, where the one-size-fits-all marketing model is dumb, the client-centric business model is king, and the sales control system gives you the tools to build your tribe with certainty. This is episode number 326, and today's show is the second of a two-part interview that I recently did with Paul Smith, best-selling author of 4 books, soon to be 6. He's got 2 new books that are going to be hitting Amazon, I think, this week or next. Paul's also a world-renowned speaker and leading expert in the field of using stories to sell more of our products and services. And again, that's going to be the topic of today's show. How to use story to sell more of your services and your products. Now, today's interview is actually going to be quite a bit different from the interview we did in part 1 of this series, which was back in episode number 325. That was actually last week. And I say it's different because Paul's going to reveal more potent, more sophisticated, literally, from what I gather, the interview's already been done. This is like his best, most effective stuff, his most effective techniques that are going to help you sell with a story. Today's episode is actually going to help you crack the story code. It's going to make what was invisible visible, not to mention eminently doable. And if you follow the methods that Paul's going to give you today, listen, I've already listened to the show. I've already done the interview. But if you listen to Paul and you'll follow the methods that he gives you today, and they're going to be like step by step, he's going to literally hold you by the hand. It's kind of like just adding water, that easy. But if you'll actually decide to follow what he gives you today, you're going to consistently convert more of your perfect prospects into paying patients, clients, and customers. I give you my word on that. Now, on today's show, Paul's going to show you, like I said, a step-by-step method, a blueprint. It's probably the best way I can explain it. A blueprint so you can craft simple yet effective stories that are going to help you sell a lot more of your services and products. In fact, Paul's going to actually give you multiple blueprints that are going to show you how to sell with a story that are going to set you up for success from the word go. Listen, everybody knows that Paul's methods for using stories to sell are incredibly powerful, and they can help you hook your prospects literally from the very first sentence of your story. And when you implement the blueprints that Paul's going to give you today, your stories are going to be deeper, they're going to be richer, and they're going to be more compelling than any stories you've ever used before. How can I be so sure? Why am I so confident? Well, number 1, I told you I've already done the interview. Number 2, I've been using stories myself to sell for a very long time, but I have learned so much. In fact, you're going to hear in this interview. In fact, let me just tell you right up front. I almost forgot about this. The day I did the interview, I almost canceled the interview because I was sick. Okay? Paul really carried me through this interview, and it's actually one of the best interviews that I've ever had. The quality of content on today's show is outstanding. So if you're looking to monetize content, if you're looking for content that's literally you can put into use the moment you stop listening to this, and certainly you're going to want to listen to this over and over again, and certainly I strongly suggest, that's why I actually guaranteed it, you want to buy his book, Sell with a Story, Paul Smith. You're going to buy that book, you're going to implement what's in it, and by the time you've implemented that, you're going to say, this was one of the best investments I've ever made in a book. And if you can't say that, email me and I will buy that book from you. Meaning, I don't want the book. I've got enough books. I've got so many books, actually, I have to actually get rid of some of them. Most of my books are digital now. I do enjoy having real paper books to hold on to, but the point is, I don't want the book. I want to tell you how good this book is. I get nothing out of this. I'm putting my neck on the line for you. The book is that good. But as I just mentioned, how do I know that Paul's methods are going to work for you? Well, like I said, I've already done the interview, but I also know that we're not talking about some new flavor of the month system here for increasing conversions and generating more sales. Something that's been conjured, like out of thin air. We're talking about, listen to me, we're talking about brain science. Human beings are wired for story. That's an indisputable fact. Human beings hunt for and respond to certain specific things in every story we hear, watch, or read, and they're the exact same specific things regardless of the setting, doesn't matter. So then that begs the question, well, why is that so? Okay, how did we get there? Because story is the language of the brain. We think, as humans, we think in story. Now, as most of you guys know, I'm a retired chiropractor, but I also have a Bachelor of Science in Human Biology. And as someone with an incredibly deep background in science, I don't have the slightest belief in Darwinian evolution. But I do believe in creation. And when God created us, he built our brains so that they use story as their go-to decoder ring for interpreting reality. So what exactly does that mean? It means that we're really expert at probing stories for specific meaning and specific information. And I mean all of us, beginning from the day we're born. Even a kindergartner recognizes an effective story because it's built into the architecture of the human brain. Story is how we make sense of the world around us. Because our response to story is hardwired, it's built into us. It's not something we have to learn or even think about, which is why we're often completely unaware of the power story has over us. So as an example as to the power of story, the effectiveness of story, listen to what Joe Lazoukas, the editor-in-chief of Contently and also the editor-in-chief of its flagship publication, The Content Strategist, has to say about the power and effectiveness of story.
There's actually a science to why stories matter. So when we hear a good story as human beings, our brain lights up. It illuminates the city of our minds. The neural activity in our brains increase fivefold. And in addition, we basically get given a drug. It's called an empathy drug called oxytocin that gets released when we hear really good stories. And this combination of all of these neurons firing at 5 times the capacity otherwise when we hear a story, plus this really awesome drug seeping in our brain that makes us feel good, makes us remember things. It makes us care. It builds relationships. And that's why storytelling has been such a fundamental part of being human since early times.
Listen, when a story grabs you, when it really grabs you, you're in its way, no questions asked, right? You've been hooked. And you may have actually heard the oft-expressed sentiment that getting lost in a good story demands a willing suspension of disbelief. In fact, listen to me. This couldn't be less true, couldn't be further from the truth, because it implies that we have a choice as to whether we're going to fall under the spell of a captivating story or not. Listen to me. We don't have a choice. The power that story has over each and every one of us is biological in its basis. And on today's show, Paul's going to give you what most of us who have to sell for a living consider the keys to the kingdom. So whether you're a professional like a dentist, a chiropractor, or a therapist, whether you're a consultant or coach, whether you're a small business owner who runs a mom and pop shop, brick and mortar business, or in fact, you're a sales professional, a dedicated sales professional, all of us share one thing in common. We all have to quote unquote sell, i.e. convince, persuade our perfect prospects, whatever you want to call it. We have to persuade these people to say yes to what we're offering and then give us money in exchange for that service or for that product. Listen, if you got kids, your kids sell you. So like I mentioned before multiple times, when your kid convinces you to take them to get an ice cream and you really don't want to do it, but you end up capitulating and then you take them to go get an ice cream, you've just been sold. When I talk about selling, quote unquote selling, I know some of you, especially like dentists and, medical doctors or people who are in the medical profession to one degree or another, even some chiropractors, they look at the idea of selling as, they get this image in their mind of some sleazy used car salesperson. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about persuading prospective patients, clients, and customers in an ethical manner to hire you, right? To give you money in exchange for what you do in your business, right? So if you're a dentist, you've got to sell, which means you've got to convince or persuade your prospective patient to accept your treatment plan, in exchange, give you money for the service that you provide to them, right? And in fact, if we look at used car sales has even changed dramatically. Look at CarMax. CarMax no longer uses sleazy used car salesmen. I'm not implying that they did, but that model they've rejected, right? That's why CarMax is one of the most successful companies in the entire world. This is like a $10 billion with a B, a $10 billion company. So no matter what type of business you're in, you have to be able to have the skills of selling in order to get prospective patients, clients, and customers to give you money for what it is you offer in your business. And Paul Smith has put together an incredible system that teaches you how to sell with a story, utilizing story, which we're all hardwired to respond to as human beings, to be able to be a lot more successful in your business. And at the same time, that pressure we all feel when we're trying to quote unquote sell someone, Paul's methods completely eliminate that. Anybody, in fact, everybody communicates with story. It's a no-brainer. It's brainlessly simple to do as long as you know how to do it. And Paul's going to show you that on today's show. In fact, I'm really excited about the show today. All right, so if you guys are ready, let's get going. All right, everybody, so I want to go ahead and welcome Paul Smith back. Paul, again, this is part 2 of our interview. Paul is the best-selling author of multiple books, but the book that we're talking about today is How to Sell with a Story. Paul, how are you doing today?
Hey, very good. Thanks for having me back on.
Guys, I just want to say very quickly that today is kind of a weird day. In 3 years of doing podcasting, I've never missed an episode. And today I almost missed. I'm a little bit under the weather, but Paul's been very understanding. And I do appreciate his professionalism to that end. But Paul, what I'd like to do, we had a really good first interview, but certainly we didn't get all the information covered that we wanted to cover. There's a lot more that you have in the way of really valuable information that you want to give to the members of Get Clients Now Nation and our subscribers and our followers. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and dive back into where we left off.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So last time we left off, we really didn't get a chance to talk about different types of stories. In fact, we talked about a few, but there's so many more that you cover in the book. And the one I want to start off with is talking about the problem story. So if you could, let's talk a little bit about the problem story. And if you could give an example or two of how that works and how that can be used to sell more stuff.
Yeah. So first, can I back up and kind of give you the full frame of the 25?
Absolutely. Wherever you want to start.
Good. So just to remind folks listening, the research that went into this, I interviewed dozens and dozens of professional salespeople as well as professional buyers. And I was asking them, I was looking for where in the entire sales process are great salespeople telling stories, real stories like the kind we're talking about here, not just making sales pitches. And what I found was that the good ones are really telling stories throughout the entire sales process, which surprised me. So literally everywhere from the moment they introduce themselves to a new prospect, to building rapport, to making the actual sales pitch itself, to resolving objections, to actually closing the sale, even to service after the sale. So and most people's sales processes are something similar to those type of phases. They have different names for them, but roughly that's kind of you should recognize that as a pretty standard sales process. And I found really basically a handful of stories being used in each of those phases. So two or three I'm introducing myself to a new prospect now, and a handful in the rapport building phase, and another handful specifically to help make the sales pitch, and another handful of stories for resolving objections, and then a different set for closing the sale. And then, like I said, even 3 or 4 different types of stories that you tell after you've made the sale to help build loyalty, and get those customers coming back. So in total, there were 25 different specific types of stories that I found. And like I said, great salespeople tell a lot of them. Now, maybe nobody tells all of them. So this is kind of the full set of which you may need 13 of these or 17 or 9 or something. But the idea was to capture the full set of the types of stories salespeople tell throughout the entire sales process. So you and I picked out ahead of time 3 or 4 that we wanted to use as examples that are some of the most important kinds. So that problem story that you mentioned, and by the way, in the book, there's a chapter, that includes each of these. There's an example of all 25 types of sales stories, but we'll cover 3 or 4 here.
Can I just interject something before you give an answer? So first of all, guys, Paul again is the consummate professional, because all I was going to do, like I said, I'm not feeling well today, but I was actually just going to dub back in the things that he just covered, but he went ahead and took the slack for me and covered my behind. So thank you for doing that, Paul.
Yeah, well, thank you for not sharing with everybody live the gory details of your illness, like you get to share with me beforehand.
Exactly. And well, the only problem would have been with the video where we jumped back and forth between different colored shirts. On the audio, nobody would have been the wiser, but it would have been a different color. Hey, did he just change his shirt or whatever? So anyway, just real quick, I want to play the devil's advocate just briefly, okay. And I think we addressed this in our previous call, but just briefly, I want to play the devil's advocate and say, well, wait a minute. Are you telling me that for me to be successful with using stories to help me sell stuff, and first of all, I don't have to be a salesman. This applies to anyone, whether you're a dentist, a chiropractor, an insurance salesman, a real estate agent, or a parent. You're working with a joint venture partner, a vendor, it doesn't matter. Stories, we talk about being a salesperson, sales professional, whatever. You're just simply trying to convince someone of something. And the fact that this is a business podcast, we're trying to convince people to hire us, to utilize our services or buy our products. But being the devil's advocate here, and let me rephrase that. I as a devout Christian, I don't like saying that, but
yeah.
Let me just throw up this question, this what if. Am I understand? And I know the answer to this, but I want to do this for the sake of our listeners. Sure. Are you telling me, Paul, that I have to learn 25 different types of stories in order for this methodology, which is proven to be, it's already demonstrated, but it's already proven to be unbelievably effective. But are you telling me I got to learn 25 different types of stories to be able to utilize this process, this methodology?
Yeah, no, not at all. And that's what I was trying to say. You personally might need 9 or 12 or
Perfect.
6 or whatever. And if you're not a professional salesperson, I would guess the fewer that you would need. But you definitely need more than one. It's not like, well, I just need one good sales story. Well, you probably need at least a handful, and you maybe need at least one in each of these phases. One story that you tell when you're introducing yourself to somebody for the first time. One story you tell to build rapport. One story you tell during kind of the sales pitch itself. Maybe one story you tell to help kind of close the sale, and maybe 1 or 2 types of stories that you tell after the sale has been made to help them come back again and again and again and be loyal. So there's 5 or 6 right there. So I think that would be the minimum number that you would want. Now, if you actually are a professional salesperson, you might need 15 or 20 or, maybe all 25, but it's not just one.
Absolutely. The more weapons you can have, and I hate to put that in a combat metaphor, but these are like they're like tools. Tools in your tool belt, arrows in your quiver. It's part of doing your job. So didn't mean to interrupt, but back to the problem story, because this is really intriguing to me. If you go ahead and just take as much time as you need on that one.
Yeah. So the problem story is one that you would tell when you get kind of in the middle of the sales cycle and you're actually at the point that you're kind of making the sales pitch itself. So you've already introduced yourself. You've already kind of built rapport with your prospect, and now you're into the sales pitch itself. And it happens to be number 13 in my list of 25, which I call the problem story. And it's a story that illustrates the quintessential problem that your product or service solves. And it's especially important to tell this story if your audience doesn't even know they have the problem that your product or service solves. So the example that I'll give you here is from a guy named Kevin Moulton, who works for a company. I can't remember the name of the company, but they do what he described as they create internet security protocol systems, which is a mouthful, basically, which means they write the software so that when you buy something online or get money out of an ATM machine, nobody steals your credit card information, right? They make that a secure transaction. And so he calls on banks. So, because banks are the ones that have to buy the software to put in their machines, right? And he always, he has a whole sales pitch he goes through, but he almost always shares this personal story, at some point during the sales call. And it's something about him. He says, a few summers ago, I was at a sales conference in Las Vegas, and you know how these conferences are in Las Vegas, right? You go to the conference during the day, you go have a cheap meal afterwards, and it's Vegas. So, you go to the casinos, right? So he said, I'm at the casino and I'm winning some and I'm losing some and I'm winning some and I'm losing some and then I'm losing more and then I'm losing more. And eventually, he gets tapped out of money. So he goes to one of the ATM machines, puts his card in, puts his number in, and it says, transaction denied. And he goes, oh, well, that's odd. So he tries the number again. Well, transaction denied. He tries a different machine, transaction denied. So he goes, okay, I know what's going on, right? I live in New Jersey. All of a sudden, I'm 2,000 miles away. I'm in Las Vegas. I'm at a casino. It's the middle of the night and I'm trying to get a ridiculous amount of money out of this machine, right? They think, my credit card company thinks somebody stole my card, right? And he said, and that's fine. I'm glad that they look out for me that way, right? But he did have a problem with what they did about it. He said they called my wife in the middle of the night in New Jersey. Okay. And he said, can you imagine what that half of the phone call sounded like? Well, I'm sorry to wake you up at 3 a.m., Mrs. Moulton, but your husband's at a casino in Vegas trying to get a boatload of money out of a machine. Do you approve of this transaction? He said, she was mad at me. I was mad at them. It was not a good scene. Right. And he said, they did not remain my credit card company for very long. Right. Now, he could, as part of that sales call, just say something like, well, our research shows that 37.5% of your clients, your customers, are moderately to slightly dissatisfied with their interaction with your banking units. And if he's got that statistic, he should certainly use it. But what does that even mean? But the story illustrates on a much more personal, visceral, human level what having a problem with your banking units means and what can happen when you don't have good internet security protocol systems. Right? Because who even knows what that means? But once you tell the story, now I know what having bad internet security protocol systems means. It means your wife or husband's going to get called in the middle of the night to try and verify something that you're legitimately trying to do with your bank, right? So that gives his buyers a more visceral understanding of the problem, especially if they don't even know they have the problem. Because once they hear that story, they can go, that probably happens to our customers all the time, and we don't even know it. Well, you tell me more. How can you keep that problem from happening? So it's a real story about something that happened to a real person that you have the solution for. And once you've told the story, they can either commiserate with, oh yeah, our customers, we have that problem all the time. Or, I don't know. Maybe we do. Maybe I should go do some research and find out, because if I do, I definitely need what you're selling. Make sense?
Makes absolute sense. And just let me throw in this one little caveat here. If you are a healthcare professional or someone who is governed by the federal HIPAA laws, obviously you don't have to use your patient's name. You can change the name and still share the story, and you're completely within the limits. You're not exposing yourself to any kind of liability. You're not betraying the trust of your patient. You're simply telling a story that's going to help serve someone else.
Right. In fact, you don't have to use a name at all, right? Just one of my patients.
Makes sense. So, Paul, what about on the flip side of that? What about the success story and the model for that? And if you could give an example of that.
Yeah, so a success story is actually number 14. So it's right on the heels of number 13, the problem story. And the reason to put that there is because it often makes a lot of sense to tell a problem story first and then tell a success story right after it. Okay, so you're setting up the problem that you solve and then telling a story about a time that you solved it. But this also gives them, like I said, a more visceral understanding of how you solve their problems. So the example I use here comes from a guy named Ben Coberna, who's the CEO of a company called EasyBuy. And they're a reverse auction company. And if you don't know what a reverse auction company is, you will by the end of the story. In fact, that's part of the reason why he tells the stories, because nobody knows what he means when he says he sells reverse auction services. So he tells a prospective client, he goes, so let me just tell you about one of my early clients. He'll say it was a municipality in Central Florida, so a small city in the state of Florida, hired me because they were spending $250,000 a year removing the sludge from one of their wastewater treatment plants. Okay, so they hired me to see if I could save them money to spend less than $250,000 removing all this toxic sludge. So he said, so we did what we do. We contacted a bunch of different sludge removal companies, told them who our client was, invited them to a meeting to tell them how the reverse auction works. And, so we're going to tell them you're all going to be competing against each other for this contract. And whoever bids the lowest, of course, is going to get the contract. So they invite everybody, they set up the meeting, all the interested parties start showing up. Well, the guy who's got the contract now, the incumbent who's been taking this sludge for years and getting paid $250,000 a year for it, he shows up with his lawyer. And he is pissed, right? He's really angry. He starts yelling and screaming, and he's like, you can't do this. This whole process is illegal. You're all going to go to jail. He was angry because they're about to take some money out of his mouth, right? Anyway, they finally got the guy calmed down, and at one point, literally, the guy throws a chair across the room. He's that angry, but they eventually got him calmed down, and they get the auction started, and it takes place over a couple of days. And so the first bid, of course, that he puts in is for $250,000. That's what he's been getting paid. Well, somebody else bids, $240, and then somebody else bids $230, and then he bids $200, and his next bid is for $150, and it keeps going down and down and down. Well, his next bid is for $0, and of course something's wrong, right? He made a mistake. He hit the wrong button. He doesn't know what he's doing. So they pause the auction. They call the guy on the phone. They say, hey, look, you put in a zero bid. What we're going to do, we're going to strike that bid. We've paused the auction. We're going to strike it. We're going to restart it, and then you can put in what you meant to do. And he said, that's okay. That won't be necessary. That wasn't a mistake. I put that bid on purpose. And they're like, well, that can't be right. Like, why would you volunteer to do this job for free? And he said, look, I've been selling that sludge to local farmers for fertilizer for decades. I'll just come pick it up for free. Yeah, and that's what he's been doing ever since. So the point of the story, Ben, is illustrating just how valuable his company's service is. Now it can't always save you 100% of what you're paying, but it illustrates a couple of things. One is sometimes they really can save you a lot of money. But the other thing he illustrates is that, because a lot of the concern that his prospects have is, if I hire you, are my current suppliers going to be mad at me? And his answer is, well, unfortunately, they're all going to get mad because nobody likes this process. But they're going to get mad at me, Ben Coberna at EasyBuy. They're not going to get mad at you. That's part of my job. That's part of what you're paying me for, is to shield you from all of that ill will and emotion, right? I'm the one in the meeting that they're yelling at and throwing the chair at, not you. So the story illustrates a couple of good things out of that. So that's an example of a success story.
What about with respect to our competitors and the stories that they're telling and how we want to be different from them? I mean, there's obviously a need for us to create and have our own unique type of stories. Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, so that's one of the most important ones I think any person needs to be able to tell, is how you're different from your competitors. So the example I use here is from a guy named Sherrod Madison, who's the CEO of United Building Maintenance. So it's a commercial cleaning company, right? The folks come in and clean your house or clean your offices at night. And when he takes on a new client, he does this interesting thing. He always sneaks into the building in the middle of the night, right before his company's taking over the cleaning. I probably shouldn't say sneak, because he's doing it with their agreement. But he goes in the middle of the night because he wants to see how they're cleaning the offices today.
Should we have some Mission Impossible music in the background while you're telling the story?
Yeah, okay. The guy coming down on the wires, yeah. So he wants to see how they're doing the job today and make sure they're well trained and well equipped, because apparently most of those employees are contract employees, and he's going to inherit them at the end of the month when his company takes over. So when he is calling on a new client, he always goes through a sales pitch, but he also tells a story about one of those times where he snuck in the middle of the night, because it illustrates how different his company operates. So he says, for example, last month we took over the Verizon building in New Jersey, and so, 2:00 in the morning, I'm in there just checking it out. And he says, I went to the first floor and I saw a guy vacuuming the carpets. And he said, that guy's using the same kind of residential quality vacuum cleaner that I use at home, right? And he said, here's the problem with that. Those corridors are 12 feet wide and they're a half a mile around the property. Like, it's going to take that guy a month just to vacuum the carpets one time, right? And plus, that machine's going to break down, right? It's not made for that kind of use. They're going to have to replace it several times. So he said, when we took over, we put him into an industrial grade, triple wide, vacuum cleaner that'll do the job, a better job in a fraction of the time. And that thing's going to last forever. He said, so, then I went to another floor and I saw somebody shampooing the carpets. And he said, it's kind of the same problem, right? He was using the same kind of residential quality squeeze bottle, walk behind, shampooer that I use at home. He said, and that's just not going to work for the same reasons. He said, so when we took over, we put him into one of those commercial grade riding shampooers, right? Which, wide and fast, does a much better job. And plus, keeps the guy off his feet. So he says, we have fewer workman's compensation, injury issues, which means my client has fewer injury issues. He said, but the last thing I wanted to do, I wanted to check out how they were dusting the offices. So I found the floor where they were doing that. And I looked on top of the cabinets. And I saw the same thing on top of every one of the cabinets. So it was a half a moon swiped out on top. And he says, I know exactly what that means, and so do you. He said, it's not that the people that were cleaning them were lazy. They were just too short because those cabinets are 5.5 feet tall, right? And if you're not tall enough, you can't reach all the way to the back. And that's what leaves that half moon swiped out. And he said, the truth is, they'd be better off not dusting the top at all because it's the contrast between the dusty part and the clean part that makes it obvious that it's not been cleaned properly. He said, so, all I did, I gave my folks, when I took over, these little 18-inch extension wands, little plastic wands to, extend their dust cloth so they could reach all the way to the back. Problem solved. So he tells that little story, and what he's illustrated there are 3 key differences between the way he does business and his competitors do business, right? He uses triple wide industrial grade vacuum cleaners. He uses commercial grade riding shampooers, and he uses these little extension wands on their dust cloths. Now, he could just tell his prospect, here are the 3 reasons why I'm better than my competitors, right? And list those 3 things. But the story is so much more compelling because now that you've heard the story, you can see in your mind's eye, that guy riding around on that shampooer like the Zamboni driver at the ice skating rink, right? You can see somebody easily reach in the back of the cabinets with their dust cloth. So it makes a more vivid mental picture that's memorable and that is compelling, far more than just giving them the list.
Let me say this, guys, and Paul, let me finish my statement before, because I want you to understand what I'm saying and not misinterpret it. First of all, this is a positive statement, but first of all, I'm not really in the business of dealing with credit cards and how they work, and I'm not in the business of dealing with professional industrial cleaning. But I will say this. The fact that I just listened with riveted attention to the stories that Paul told in relation to industries that I have nothing to do with. The fact that he held my attention and I was actually interested in listening to his stories and I was actually engaged by his stories is proof positive. If you guys are like me at all, I am sure you feel the same way, is proof positive that we need to learn how to use stories to sell with. Paul, continuing on, what about the emotional engagement in stories? I know a lot of times we can tell, like take it as an example, a medical doctor or a dentist, chiropractors not so much. They can be really unemotional. They can be kind of flat when it comes to telling stories. So why is having that emotional component to stories so incredibly important? In fact, I know some of the reasons, but from your take, I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, the main reason is because it turns out that's how human beings make decisions, right? And your doctors, folks in the medical field probably know this better than I do, but much of the research into cognitive science has taught us in the last couple of decades that human beings usually make emotional, subconscious decisions in one place in their brain, and then they rationalize those decisions a few nanoseconds later in a more conscious thinking, logical processing part of the brain. So we leave a decision-making process thinking we made it for these logical reasons because that's all we remember, when the truth is our kind of reptilian brain decided a few seconds earlier for more emotional reasons, and we're just justifying it. So if you want to influence what people think and feel and do, whether that's leadership or sales or marketing or whatever, you need to speak to both parts of the brain. And stories are just uniquely qualified to talk to both parts of the brain. So that's the reason why.
Yeah, actually, there's a ton of cognitive research, and I will say this: most of my clients, speaking of like the dentists and the chiropractors, they're not familiar with this cognitive science, the research that's been done for the most part. Some of them are, like the high-level ones are. I would say more so the marketers. But in fact, all decisions are made on an emotional level at a very, very high level. It's such a high level that often we're not aware of the fact that it's happening. I think we talked about it in the last episode, but run through that story just quickly, Paul, if you could, about the gentleman that had, I guess, almost like a lobotomy. He had an injury to his frontal lobe, and he was unable to make decisions because of that. His whole life was ruined because of his inability to feel emotion.
Yeah, so I can't remember the guy's name. Phineas Gage. Yeah, so he was a railroad worker, and he was literally mining, blowing up parts of mountains to put railroad tracks through, and he was pounding one of these metal rods down into a hole with a dynamite underneath it, and it accidentally went off and literally shot what's basically like a railroad spike up through the bottom of his chin and out the top of his head. And you'd think that, well, of course the guy's going to die immediately, but he didn't for some reason. But it took out a large part of his brain, and it turned out to be the emotional processing part of the brain. And the result of it was he, believe it or not, could still carry on normal conversations. And, he lived years after that, but he almost completely lost his ability to make decisions. And it also radically changed his personality. And because that emotional processing part of the brain was just gone. Right? So we need that. We need those emotions to make decisions.
That's why it's so important to make sure that there's a huge emotional component to every story that you tell, and that as juxtaposed to just simply telling facts. So could you actually illustrate how emotion actually can create a story from just a set of facts?
Yeah. So the best example of this comes from a woman named Deanne Marshall, who I interviewed for the book. She's the Chief Development Officer at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And that means she's the chief fundraiser. So she goes to these events with, a bunch of wealthy people she's invited and tells miraculous, children get cured stories and helps, hopefully they'll get their checkbooks out and donate to the hospital. But one of the stories she tells is different than the others because it's about her personally. And she says, one day I was walking through the lobby of the Children's Hospital, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye a white minivan pulling up into one of the front spots. And a woman gets out of the driver's side door, and she walks around to the back of the minivan and stopped in what was probably a strategically chosen location. The look on the woman's face went from normal to just abject anguish. The woman bends over at the waist and just bursts into tears, like bawling her eyes out right there behind the minivan. And of course, Deanne's in the lobby watching through the windows, looking at this happen and wondering, oh my gosh, what do I do? Do I rush out there and comfort this woman, or do I give her a moment of dignity alone in this cathartic moment she's having? And well, of course, eventually the woman, stands up and straightens her blouse and wipes off her face and puts on a happier face and walks around, opens the passenger side of the minivan, gets out her little baby daughter, puts her into a stroller and shoves it into the front doors of the Children's Hospital. And that's kind of where the story ends. And if you think about it as a story about that woman and her daughter, it's terribly unsettling because it's an unfinished story. Like, you don't know who the woman is or who the girl is. You don't know if she lives or dies. But it's not really a story about the woman and her daughter. It's a story about Deanne Marshall in the lobby watching this happen and mentally struggling with what to do about it. And she can finish her story by saying, look, as a mom myself, I totally resonated with what must have been going on in that moment. Obviously this woman's daughter's sick, and she's probably driven her here, dozens of times. And, and she's distraught about it, but she doesn't want to look, upset in front of her daughter because it'll scare her daughter. But she needed that one private moment behind the van to just let it out. And she closes her story by saying, I hope that you never find yourself bent over at the back of your minivan, bawling your eyes out over a sick child. But if you do, you're going to want to be in my parking lot, right? Where we've got all the things to take care of these kids and their special needs, right? And that's when the checkbooks come out. And so, I share that story not to get you to donate money to Children's Hospital, but if you did, I'm sure that would be great. The point is to show you the impact that the emotional moment at the back of the minivan had on everything else in the story. I mean, imagine if everything in that story was the same except for one thing, right? So Deanne Marshall's walking through the lobby, looks out into the parking lot, white minivan pulls up, woman gets out, walks around to the back, bends over at the waist, and sneezes, right? Doesn't cry, she sneezes, gets her kid, pushes into the front door. Like, no story, right? That wouldn't be an interesting story. She wouldn't have told me. I wouldn't have wrote it in the book. I wouldn't be telling you about it now. It's boring. But the fact that she cried at the back of the minivan, had an emotional moment instead of just sneezed, the crying, the emotion, it turned all the other facts into an interesting story that had meaning, right? So emotion turns a set of facts into a story. So it's really a defining characteristic of what a story is. So you need to have an emotional moment in a story.
Guys, can you see now why I am so captivated by learning? Obviously, communication and understanding and utilizing and mastering the art of communication is very, very important to me. It's something that I have a tremendous amount of interest in, just from a personal level. I try to share that with you guys, but can you see how important it is to learn how to use these strategies so that you can sell with a story? Paul, what about techniques? Are there any techniques? Because I can already hear the voices now. Some of my phone is actually exploding from people sending me text messages. I don't have a chat box on our video, but Now, actually, my phone's
how do we do this?
My phone's not exploding. But what about techniques? I can just hear the voices now of people listening to this. At that point, my phone's going to start exploding, or they're going to be sending emails. Well, that's great. We need to add all these emotional elements to our stories, but how do we do that? Where do we start? Are there any tools or techniques that you have that can help people kind of move in that direction that would really equip them for that purpose?
Yeah, there are three real simple ones I can explain real quickly, and there's some more covered in the book. But the first is just dialogue, right? Human beings say what they think and feel. So if your stories are just third-person recitations of what happened with no dialogue, you're missing out on an opportunity to create more emotional engagement. Say what your characters were saying and thinking at the time. You know, he said this and she said this and Bob said this. You know, that will bring out some of the emotion. The other two methods, they'll kind of go together. They're called tell me and show me. Tell me is the simplest one. Just name the emotion that people were having. She was angry. He was sad. They were frightened, right? At a minimum, you can communicate it that way. But the show me is a little more powerful, which show me doesn't mean you acting out. This is not an acting class, but you describe the physical manifestations of the emotion on the main characters and let the audience figure out what the emotion was. So, for example, instead of saying he was angry, say he started yelling. Okay, well, people yell when they're angry. Or instead of saying she was sad, say she started crying. Well, people cry when they're sad, right? So let the audience figure it out from the physics of what's going on in the story. And that's, for some reason, a more visceral, intuitive way for people to experience the emotions in the stories, that they have to figure it out from the clues.
I'll tell you exactly why. As an example, when it comes to persuading someone, if you try to convince someone why they should do something, like force your opinion on them, there's a lot of resistance. But if you can create through dialogue and communication and through story, as an example, the environment in their own mind where they come to the conclusion themselves, that's where the real deal is. That's where the money is. And so, I mean, just like earlier when you said he threw a chair across the room, the guy was so upset. Well, I mean, he didn't say he was so upset. You said he even threw a chair across the room. Well, immediately in my mind, I surmised the guy obviously has to be angry given the situation, the circumstances you had outlined. So I came to that conclusion, which made it much more realistic to me. And so this has to do with not only communication, but within storytelling as well. What about at the end of our stories? Is there a method or technique to make them a lot more effective as we get to the end of the particular story? Or like the story you just told, had she not, the woman you just discussed at the hospital, I forgot her name, but had she just stopped at that point, you know, the lady pushed her child through the front doors of the hospital and just stopped. There's got to be more. What's the technique involved in that process to make that story really anchor and hit home and do the job it's supposed to do for us?
Yeah, so just like in any novel or movie, it's best if you can have a surprise ending, right? I mean, you love those in the movies you watch. I assume that's where you're going with this question. So you want to have a surprise, and hopefully at the end of the story. And the reason that's important is not just because it makes it more entertaining, although it does. It's because it literally makes the story more memorable. So here's another little piece of cognitive science that some of your listeners may be even more familiar with than I am. But it turns out human memories are not formed instantaneously like a digital camera. You know, when you snap a picture, it's just there. It's more like old-fashioned film camera. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but you take the film to the dark room and, you know, you develop it over an hour or two. Memories are really formed more like that. In fact, there's a period of time called the memory consolidation period, which can be from a few seconds to a few minutes to even a few hours in some cases, after something happens, while it's still being processed in memory, until it's actually in short-term memory. Now, the process to get to long-term memory is even more complicated, but just getting into short-term memory requires this period of time for it to marinate in the brain. And if you interrupt that process, the memory will not be formed. So that's why people, when they get a concussion from a car accident or a football injury, they typically have short-term memory loss. In fact, most of those people don't even remember the accident, right? They'll wake up in the hospital like, well, how did I get here?
I'm one of those people, as I mentioned earlier. I was hit head on by a dump truck and in a coma for 9 days, massive head injuries.
Oh, wow. So did you remember the accident? I mean, maybe do now, but at the time, did you remember the accident?
I still don't remember the impact of the accident. I remember up until the point of, I remember the gentleman telling me to go ahead and drive through the construction area. I don't remember what he says now because this was all the way back in 1994, but no, I have no memory whatsoever of the impact. The only memory I have, the first memory in the hospital is he's now deceased, but my father-in-law at the time was standing over the top of me. I remember exactly what he was wearing. He had gotten there first because they flew me in on a helicopter, and this is before I slipped into a coma. But I remember that, and then just bits and pieces. But yeah, go ahead. And I just wanted to throw that in there because it's absolutely true.
Right. So the reason why you didn't remember the accident is because it was a head-on collision with another vehicle, did you say?
Dump truck loaded with 30 tons of asphalt, yeah.
Right. So the reason you don't remember that is because the memory of the dump truck coming towards you, which you probably saw it coming a few seconds before, like you just couldn't do anything about it, right? The reason that's no longer in memory or never was in memory is because the memory of that was still in the memory consolidation process being processed when the impact occurred. And so it stopped, getting your head hit, I'm sure very hard, stopped the memory consolidation process. So if you think of it in computer terms, the memory never finished rendering. It never got to finish rendering. So it was never put into short-term memory. So to connect the dots here, if there are things like a concussion or an injury that can interrupt the memory consolidation process, there are things that can enhance it and make it more efficient and effective. One of those things is in your morning coffee, right? Caffeine, right? It literally makes the memory consolidation process faster and more efficient. But another thing is adrenaline, the kind of adrenaline that gets naturally released in your system when you're frightened or surprised. So literally, to connect all the dots, the reason why a surprise at the end of the story is important is because it makes your story more memorable. In fact, it makes the end of the things that happen right up near the end of the story and the lesson and the recommended action, more memorable. So you want to have one in your sales stories for a more practical reason than just it makes them more entertaining.
That one bit of advice, and I have another question I'm going to follow up. That one piece of information right there, guys, is worth the entire both episodes. If all I got from both episodes was that, and we've gotten a lot more, guys, that's a pearl of wisdom. That is worth so much money right there just to know that for a fact. Okay, so we need to create a surprise ending to our stories, Paul. How do we do that?
Yeah, so there's a really simple technique, and you can do it with almost any story. So I'll just illustrate it for you here right now. So imagine a young boy named James, right, 9-year-old kid. He's in the kitchen with his mom and his mom's sister. While mom and auntie are sitting at the kitchen table having a cup of tea, James is standing at the stove watching the tea kettle boil. And he's just fascinated with it, right? He's watching the jet of steam come out of the tea kettle, and he's got a little spoon. He holds it up there into the jet of steam, and he watches little drops of water condense on the spoon and trickle down and drip into a cup. And he's just watching this cycle go over and over and over again, just fascinated with it. Well, eventually, his mother just gets tired of him. She just kind of barks at him, James, like, go do your homework, read a book, or ride your bike, right? Go do something. Aren't you ashamed of yourself just wasting your time here like this? Well, fortunately, young James was undaunted by his mother's admonition because 20 years later, at the age of 29, of course, but in the year 1765, James Watt reinvented the steam engine, ushering in the Industrial Revolution that we, of course, all benefit from today, and all based on a fascination with steam that he developed at the age of 9 in his mother's kitchen. Right? Now, unless you're a history buff, my guess is you were surprised at the end when you found out that was James Watt, inventor of the steam engine, right?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. At least it wasn't etched into my long-term memory, but that was right. That's awesome.
Right. So now ask yourself, how did I create that surprise? And the answer is simple. I didn't tell you his last name until the end of the story, right? I took here's the technique. I took one vital piece of information, his last name, that belonged at the beginning of the story, right? When you tell a story, you introduce the main character at the beginning. Here, young James Watts in the kitchen with his mom, right? Right? You belonged at the beginning, but I removed it and I didn't deliver it to you until the end, which presto creates a surprise ending. Now, you don't want to do that with a whole lot of information. You don't want to move them out of the proper order. I think we covered in the last podcast the order, the 8 questions you have to answer in the order in which you have to answer them. Well, who the main character is question like 3. It's right up near the beginning. So if you smartly take one of those pieces of information and move it to the end, you will create a surprise ending, and you can do it with almost any story.
Does it matter which one of those 8? I mean, is it limited to, or are there any of the 8 that you would say you can use this method, this strategy for a surprise ending, but never use number 6 or number 8 for that process?
Yeah, so naturally, the ones at the end aren't going to be very helpful because they belong at the end anyway, right? So questions 1, probably question 2, 3, and 4 would be the best ones, which is where and when did it happen? Who's the main character? and what problem or opportunity they ran into, but probably mostly where and when and who. So in fact, in that story, the truth is I probably did both of those. Like I didn't tell you that it was 1765 or whatever it was, right? I didn't. You found that out at the end. So those are probably the most effective ones to use.
Nice. Is there any question today that I asked that I didn't ask that I should have?
Oh, well, I do have a couple of new books out, which your listeners might be interested in.
Yeah, I'm going to get to those. We're going to promote those heavily, and I'm going to give you my double thumbs up. And I'm going to actually, like I did with your first book, the book we're talking about today in the show, How to Sell with a Story. Same with these other two books. If you buy the two books we're going to talk about, I haven't read them, but knowing Paul and the quality of the stuff he's given us and just having already read some of his work, I know these are going to be quality. So if you invest in his books, read them. If you can't say, hey, wow, this was worth multiples of what I invested to get the book, let me know and I will buy the book from you and replace it. So I'm going to give that guarantee right up front. But before we get into your books, the last question I love to always ask is there a question today that I didn't ask that I should have?
Well, seeing as how I kind of sent you these questions ahead of time, I think the answer is no.
Well, I didn't know if I had missed one. So anyway.
Did I just give away one of the secrets of podcast production right there?
No, we're good. Okay, so you got two new books. Tell us about those books.
Yeah, so the one just came out a couple of months ago is called The 10 Stories Great Leaders Tell. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's after writing several books on storytelling and sharing, hundreds of different stories, I finally decided to focus a little bit and give people a list of here are the 10 most important stories that I think every leader needs to be able to tell, and a quick primer on how to find and tell those yourself. So it's a really short book. Like you can read the whole book in an hour, as opposed to the Sell with a Story book, which is a normal sized book that it'll take you 8-10 hours to kind of read through. This is a 1 hour read, only 10 stories in it, the 10 most important stories leaders need to be able to tell. And a sales and a marketing story are 2 of the 10, by the way, but there are others that leaders need to be able to tell. The second book actually comes out a week from today as we're recording this, but it'll probably already be out by the time we air. And it's called 4 Days with Kenny Tedford. And it's a completely different type of book. So this is not a book about storytelling, but it is an amazing story. So it's essentially a biography of this gentleman named Kenny Tedford, who I would describe as something of a combination of Helen Keller and Forrest Gump. All right. So, except he's a real guy. All right. So he was born deaf in both ears and partially blind in one eye, and he couldn't speak until he was 10 years of age, and partially paralyzed on one side of his body. So he's got most of the problems that the physical struggles that Helen Keller had, but he has the mental challenges that Forrest Gump has. So I think his IQ tests out at around 10 or 11 years of age, but he's a 66-year-old man, walking around the world in a grown man's body. So you can just imagine the life challenges that this man has to face. But despite that, literally, it took him to the age of 55, but he got a master's degree. Okay. And it happens to be in storytelling, by the way. And he's just led the most amazing life. And he's just the most inspiring human being I think I've ever met. And I knew that this man's story needed to be told. And there's just so many lessons in the book, life lessons, not only how to be or deal with people who have disabilities, but just life lessons and actually some leadership lessons along the way that we kind of called out. And it's hilarious. Like you can imagine all the problems that somebody would get into if they, had a childlike mentality, but live in an adult world. I mean, every day is another laugh. Something interesting happens, and he just takes it in stride and deals with it in the most charming and inspiring way. And so that book's out next week.
Yeah, I definitely want to get both of those books. I always love a good story. So, well, Paul, listen, I really, really appreciate you doing the show. There are really good podcasts. There are really good interviewees that I've had on the show. And then there are really, really good interviews that I've had on the show. Really good interviewees I've had on the show. I would rank you right up there at the top. I can't really think of anyone off the top of my head who's given, I'm always trying to find someone who can give actionable, valuable information. And this is certainly this is certainly a topic that's really something that I'm very, very interested in. And I think, like I mentioned on our first episode, some of the questions that I were going to ask were selfish for my own sake. that I wanted to know, but I think you've over delivered as far as value. Guys, I want to again recommend these books, the books that Paul mentioned today, and also the book, How to Sell with a Story. I will guarantee all 3 of these books. So if you buy them, read them, you're either going to say, these were the most incredible investment of my time. I really enjoyed them and got a lot out of it. And if you can't say that, then email me and I will buy the book from you. I don't want your books. I'll just replace them with another book. I'll give you credit for that. But
that's a bold offer, especially in these last 2 that you haven't read yet.
Yeah, so I'm really
luck with that.
Looking forward to that, and very, very thankful again that you've done this, and thanks for covering for me today. As I've been definitely under the weather. I don't remember the last time I was ill, but today's definitely one of those hardcore days.
Yeah,
but,
well, I hope you get better soon.
I appreciate it. All right, I'll wrap it up with that, and we'll be in touch.
Cheers.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye. If your business is struggling and you can't crack the online marketing code, and you'd like to access the newest and most effective strategies, systems, and tools that are working right now in the trenches, check out the funneltribes.com online community and discover how thousands of consultants and professionals just like you are transforming their businesses, building massive tribes of loyal clients, and making more money.